Good morning. My name is Lisa Culpepper Beverly, and on behalf of the Poplar Forest African American Advisory Panel, I want to welcome you all to the fourth annual African American Family History Day. This year's event is definitely different than we typically experience, but has opened up the event to the entire country, and we're excited to welcome you from wherever you're tuning in. The African American Advisory Panel formed in 2016 to aid Popular Forest in its quest to re-envision the visitor experience and to become a more inclusive organization. The panel provides critical feedback to Popular Forest interpretive and exhibit planning and is developing the new programs. This Family History Day was the first event created between Popular Forest, the advisory panel, and we continue to work to create a new, interesting interpretation and program. We begin today's talk with entitled an introduction to the African American history and archaeology at Popular Forest, presented by Dr. Eric Proebsting, Director of Archaeology and Landscapes at Popular Forest, and Karen McIlvoy, Archaeology Laboratory Analyst. Eric and Karen will discuss how archaeology plays an invaluable role in uncovering artifacts and other evidence to help share the stories of more than 200 enslaved men, women, and children held at Poplar Forest during Jefferson's lifetime. This work includes ongoing efforts to develop family trees, personal biographies for those who lived and labored at Poplar Forest. And now I will turn this over to Eric and Karen.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with you all today in a remote format. I know we'd love to be together, but this is an exciting, it's always an exciting event each year to be part of the African American Family History Day and be able to share some things with you all in support of the event from the Department of Archaeology here at Poplar Forest. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Be patient as I'm still, as many times as I've tried to do this, it never goes as smoothly as I hope. But is there a confirmation? Does everybody see my screen? Okay, I assume it's working. So,
yeah, I see it.
So today I'm going to talk about just a really brief introduction, but of things that we've learned over the past really 30 plus years here at Poplar Forest. With my colleague Karen McIlvoy, we'll be providing some of that information. I want to acknowledge the other member of our department, which is Dr. Jen Ogborn, our curator of archaeological collections, and then members of previous departments that have contributed to this work, especially Dr. Barbara Heath, Jack Gary, Dr. Lori Lee, and many others who've contributed to some of the work we're going to talk about today. As we begin, Poplar Forest, I'm just going to give a brief overview of the kind of the history of the property, some of the work we've done at Poplar Forest as part of the restoration and research that's taken place, and specifically to talk about how that relates to the lives of enslaved people who lived at Poplar Forest. Presently, Poplar Forest consists of over 600 acres of original plantation, which was roughly 5,000 acres. And the work that's taken place at Poplar Forest over the past 30 years is focused on the restoration of Jefferson's retreat home and associated buildings, as well as the ornamental grounds. And we'll touch on a little bit of that during today's talk. An equal emphasis has been on understanding and learning about the lives of the people who lived and labored on the property from the beginning in the 1700s up through emancipation. And so that'll be the focus of today's discussion. Poplar Forest is part of a larger movement of people being investing from the Virginia Tidewater into lands that were being opened up in the Piedmont. This is part of the process of tobacco agriculture expanding, which tobacco was the primary cash crop of Virginia really from its outset. And as it expanded, there was a need for new lands and also a steady source of labor, which intensified slavery within the colony of Virginia from the 1600s into the 1700s, and by at this point the mid 1700s, when people started to purchase lands here in this portion of the Piedmont. In this case, William Stith was given leave to obtain a patent of land that would become Poplar Forest in the 1740s. William Stith lived in Williamsburg. Was not unlike many of these investors who he never saw Poplar Forest. He just purchased it with the thought of likely turning it around and selling it again. He died soon after the land was he obtained. The land passed into several other people's hands until it reached John Wales' hands in the 1760s. And it was at that point that Poplar Forest first became established as a plantation. John Wales, like many of his contemporaries who were wealthy planters who lived along the lower reaches of the James River, owned multiple plantations. This included his home plantation, also known as the Forest, but also a number of other plantations. Some of these holdings have been investigated by Barbara Heath, now a professor at the University of Tennessee, formerly director of archaeology here at Poplar Forest. These included multiple locations that people were forcibly sent from one to the next as new lands were opened. And so the story of people who arrived at Poplar Forest, which is on the farther westernmost end of these holdings that John Wales had, may have lived at multiple places over the course of their life, and likely in many cases that was a common thing. We have several spots that we've investigated at Poplar Forest that date to this early time period when Poplar Forest first began as a plantation. At that time, as was the case with these other kind of distant plantations, white overseers were relied on to provide information to the distant owner. You can see on the map here where it says Wingoes, and you see a house that represents the overseer's residence. So an overseer would have lived at these two different, what we call quarter farms. The other, referred to as the old plantation, also sometimes known as the Tomahawk quarter farm, would have had an overseer in residence there as well. Work at the Wingo site took place over the past, roughly the past decade. There's been significant work to find locations where people were living. You can see on the left side of this slide, there's a filled-in root cellar, which has debris from the cabin that once existed. There's artifacts that have been found to kind of help speak to the lives of the people who lived at this quarter farm. Very early on, some of the first people to come and kind of clear the land and establish what plantations, what then would have been the western frontier of the colony. At North Hill, we have, this is another site that was excavated, and this time in the 1990s, kind of the latter portion of the 1990s. We find lots of evidence, artifact evidence. This is just a few things, including things like buttons and beads, pieces of, you see an iron pot on the right side, lots of things related to cooking, what people were eating, the types of dishes people were eating on. A gun flint shown there, so evidence of enslaved people here were hunting. They were gathering different types of plants, and as well as, of course, growing plants and raising livestock and things like that. And all this kind of thing contributes to our understanding based on the archaeological record, along with evidence of where buildings and things like that were located. One of the things we are fortunate to have at Poplar Forest is a very detailed documentary record throughout Jefferson's ownership or management of the property. He received Poplar Forest through his wife, Martha Jefferson, when his father-in-law, John Wales, died in 1773. And at that time, you can see there's just a handful of people living at what was the Tomahawk quarter farm, referred to here as Poplar Forest, and the Wingoes quarter farm, kind of at the outset. But you can see soon after that, just a short year later, Jefferson makes a note in his farm book of the people living at the Wingoes quarter farm, and you can see how many more people have been moved to that place. These are people moved from Jefferson's plantations, for example, at Monticello, Shadwell, that area where he held property previously, but also people who were living on other quarter farms that located on other lands that John Wales had owned and being moved to Poplar Forest at that time. My colleague Karen McIlvoy will delve into using these records as she talks about family trees at Poplar Forest and chooses a couple biographies that we can speak to the many that were here at Poplar Forest during Jefferson's ownership. One thing that is a consistent trend during Jefferson's life is the number of enslaved people increases at Poplar Forest. This is, close to 30 individuals in 1774. By 1819, over 90 individuals. And this coincided with more ground being put under cultivation and sort of intensifying agriculture at Poplar Forest, and also the development of families and the growth of families at Poplar Forest as well. You can see here at this sort of, during this process, there was another quarter farm established called Bear Creek, and we haven't had the opportunity to do archaeology at Bear Creek. It's located off our current property, like Wingo's. In the case of Wingo's, it's a place that is being preserved in perpetuity. But for Bear Creek, we haven't had the opportunity to explore it yet, but we do know a lot about it through evidence based on Jefferson's documents again. In this case, you can see a family unit that's listed with James and Kate Hubbard being the patriarch and matriarch of that family. They were at Monticello in the 1780s and then moved to Poplar Forest along with their children. And we see here that there's actually a place on this map and another map as well created roughly the same time frame, the 1790s, that show where the Hubbards were living. This was because James was what Jefferson referred to as a headman. He essentially was supervised this quarter farm, an enslaved man, but he was a supervisor for this quarter farm, and which included the fields shown here, but as well as other fields too. This was a task that passed to his adopted son, Nace, and other members of the family had other roles within Poplar Forest throughout Jefferson's ownership of often of prominence. And we'll talk about a couple of those stories as we go. The quarter site, just simply referred to as the quarter site, is a slave quarter that dates a little bit later in time, so the 1790s to 1812 roughly. So it includes both the time period when Jefferson sort of intensifying some of the agriculture work at Poplar Forest, shifting from just tobacco agriculture to mixed grain agriculture. The number of people are increasing who are living at Poplar Forest, and then it dovetails into Jefferson's retreat, which began in 1806 with the building of the retreat house. And so it's been really a source of focus for a lot of research. There's a book Barbara Heath wrote back in the late 90s called Hidden Lives, if you're interested in learning more about this period and kind of what we've learned through the archaeology and the documents for this particular quarter. It's a very easy place to kind of get some very interesting details about this site. We've got plenty of evidence that's been revealed through what we call archaeological features, and so holes in the ground, post holes that were dug for fence lines, things like what we call often subfloor pits, which is simply a root cellar that was dug as part of a building. We've got evidence of a two-part log structure which had end chimneys, which was the largest of the buildings at the quarter site, as well as two other structures. And you can see here where fence lines were also located around yard spaces as well as a possible garden. This has really been useful and kind of unique to what we've been able to locate so far at Poplar Forest, in that it shows the full yard that surrounded a cabin, which was a very common feature. And so when we think about living spaces, the indoors and the outdoors were equally important at that time. In addition, we have lots of artifacts, again, just showing a few of the many artifacts, but things related to work, things like a blacksmith tool, You can see in the top left corner of the image a crow's iron, which was used for coopering barrels, carpentry tools, agricultural tools. Of course, ceramics, these are British-made ceramics, which could have been provisioned or procured by enslaved people living at the quarter site from nearby stores in New London or possibly Lynchburg. We have evidence of clothing, lots of buttons, for example, buckles, beads, objects of personal adornment, like we see at the North Hill site, are present here as well. And we also see things like what people are making who live at the quarter site. We find numerous stone pipes, for example, stone tobacco pipes in different states being created. And so there's a lot of these details that we can kind of pull into our understanding of the people who lived here, even though if we don't know the exact names of those individuals. We know kind of names for the whole community that was living at this quarter, but maybe not specifically who was living in each structure. At this site, we've back in the 90s erected a sort of an outline of it that's been used as a place for interpretive events and programs over the last several years, which has been used to talk about the story of people who lived at Poplar Forest, but also kind of the larger story of slavery and sort of the significance of that within the local region, and opportunities for people to come and connect with local history as well. The quarter site's in the process of being kind of re-envisioned in terms of the interpretation and it, refreshed and re-envisioned. And we're really excited to be working with the African American Advisory Group, with 106 Group, which is a consulting firm, and a number of scholars in addition to our staff to be able to create an exhibit that shows, you can see in this slide, stories of resistance, resilience, and agency, looking to reflect humanity, life, love, fortitude, strength, grace, and light, among other things. Kind of speak to the humanity and the experience of enslaved people at Poplar Forest. This will include a number of stops, and one of the features will include panels where you can see different pieces of life, including indoors, in this case, one of the quarters that was occupied at that time. Lots of different pieces kind of go into this interpretation, including the archaeology, using actors who partner with Poplar Forest for different events, and clothing provided by our curator of archaeological collections, Dr. Jen Ogborn, to be able to provide models then to create these beautiful watercolors created by artist E.V. Lewis, who's working on this project. So we're really excited about this and to be able to share it when it's completed next year with all of you and others who come to visit. Jefferson's retreat house, as I've mentioned, has been a focus of a lot of work, and this includes, restoring the exterior to how it would have looked when the exterior was completed in 1809. Subsequent landowners after Jefferson had changed the house in different ways. The director of architectural restoration, Travis McDonald, has spent his career bringing it back to that period. In the case of the wing of offices or service rooms that adjoined the main retreat house, it was completely lost to history, and so archaeology brought it back and has been used as the foundation for the restoration of that piece of the house. But the house itself, in addition to being reflective of Jefferson's designs, is also reflective of the people who created it, and this included both free and enslaved laborers. The house is built of over 300,000 brick, or roughly that many bricks, that were fired on the property by enslaved laborers who dug the soil and fired it. The wing of offices provided service spaces for people who were attending to Jefferson, enslaved people on the property attending to Jefferson during his residence. And so this is all part of that story as well. And with the restoration of the woodworking in the house, this is part of recreating elements that were originally created by John Hemmings, who is the brother of Sally Hemings, lived at Monticello, did some of the most challenging work both at Monticello and at Poplar Forest in his joinery shop, and then on site as well, including things like entablatures and railings, doors and furniture. We actually have 2 doors that John Hemmings built for Poplar Forest that have survived the fire. There was a fire in the 1840s at Poplar Forest. Much of the woodwork was lost, but these 2 doors have survived, and you can see one on the right side of your screen, which is available to see at Poplar Forest. Jefferson wrote back and forth to John Hemmings. He had could read and write, and he relayed information to Jefferson, and Jefferson relayed information to him. And much of those documents have allowed us to be able to restore Poplar Forest in the exact details that it has today. Hemmings brought his assistants, Beverly, Madison, and Eston, his nephews. They were also Sally and Thomas Jefferson's children, which worked at Poplar Forest periodically. We don't have any evidence that they're there at the same time that Thomas Jefferson was in residence, but they certainly were there as part of the creation of this. And so, in many ways, the story of the Hemmings, John Hemmings and the Hemmings family is very much embedded within the story of Poplar Forest, the creation of the architecture of Poplar Forest. Outside of the retreat house itself was a 10-acre ornamental grounds. We'll talk about that a little bit here in a few minutes. And then a curtilage, which was 61 acres. This was formalized by 1812 to kind of create the retreat landscape. The curtilage included things like a vegetable garden, stables, orchards, slave quarters. Some of these features we found archaeologically, other ones we're still looking for. And then outside of that was the agricultural fields. The ornamental grounds themselves, this is an artist's rendition created a number of years ago, have been the focus of some of our investigations over the last number of years. And over time, we're able to kind of refine what different portions of it look like. One of the big focuses for us has been one of the largest elements, which is the sunken lawn behind Jefferson's retreat house. This was dug by hand under the leadership of Phil Hubbard, who was tasked with this task, along with no doubt other enslaved men who probably worked alongside of him. He was paid roughly 12 cents per cubic yard that was dug, and this was done after his typical day's work. And so Phil, as a member of the larger Hubbard family, spent time at both Monticello and Poplar Forest, and at this time was at Poplar Forest. The mounds themselves are created. We've done excavations of them, and you can see the layers that were added over time to create what was designed to be this 5-part Palladian design that Jefferson intended, including the central pavilion, which is the retreat house itself, as well as 2 end pavilions made of soil, the mounds, connected by double rows of trees, and then later a wing added to the side to create these L's that made a 5-part design. But for Phil, the mounds represented opportunity. And in this case, an opportunity to make a small amount of money, which was difficult to come by and under the conditions of slavery, to be able to help improve his life and the life of his family. We have other instances where Jefferson purchased things from enslaved people at Poplar Forest and Monticello as well. And this is one instance of an opportunity that Phil took advantage of. We've focused on several different places in terms of looking at the landscape. You can see here a double row of trees west of the house, 2 clumps of trees and oval flower beds north of the house, as well as the Carriage Circle. Research in these areas has revealed not only how these areas were designed, these portions of the landscape were designed, but also who built, or how they were built, and how they were maintained over time by no doubt enslaved laborers living at Poplar Forest. One of the biggest efforts, the most dramatic piece of this work that was done, which has been in the process of being restored in collaboration with the Garden Club of Virginia, was the Carriage Circle, originally built by enslaved people living at Poplar Forest with cobbles gathered from the surrounding fields. You can see here, these are quartz cobblestones. We're looking at it at a distance, hand collected. It's all been preserved beneath the current restoration which has taken place. And there's actually a viewing window where you can see the original surface, which is too rough to stand on and experience directly. But the restored surface will allow visitors, when it's completed in the months to come, to be able to reflect on the original people who created the turnaround. It's been laid down, the restoration has been laid down by hand above the protected original surface that lies below, with using the same materials. Over 40,000 cobblestones laid. We believe the original lumber to be at least twice that many, because it was more than just a one layer thick with the original surface. And so it's just an amazing amount of work, both for the original surface and this current surface that's been recreated. One of the really exciting things about having the restorations complete is it provides backdrops for being able to tell the story of the people who created Poplar Forest. And this includes members of the enslaved community that we know their stories. We are able to provide information to be able to help tell those stories. This includes a series of vignettes that have been written and directed by Teresa Harris, who's a member of our African American Advisory Group, and they're just wonderful opportunities to be able to see the story being told in a very active way, in a very powerful way, at the site in which it took place. One of those vignettes includes for these larger series of plays, which we look forward to resuming next year after the pandemic is over. Is a scene between Jefferson's enslaved cook Hannah and her son Billy, and the name "The Day Is Past and Gone" for this whole series of vignettes comes from a letter that Hannah wrote to Jefferson, where she references a hymn that was popular at the time with that same name. Within this encounter, it portrays Hannah talking to her son, who had some difficulties. He ran away, had some encounters with overseers later on, ultimately was sold, and the last we know of Billy's life is he was in Louisiana, New Orleans, after he had run away again. And so we know a good deal about their lives, and this is a very poignant kind of encounter between Hannah and her son that's taking place as part of these vignettes at Poplar Forest. Hannah's Kitchen is a place that we've been able to reconstruct based on the archaeological research, and also be able to kind of add to that experience through the objects we found, the tools Hannah used when she was cooking when Jefferson was in residence within this kitchen, including parts of the bell system that physically connected Jefferson when he was in residence to the wing of offices where people were working to support his time at Poplar Forest. We know Hannah had a cabin that was at that time that was located not far from where the main house was located. We're in the process of testing some new areas that on Poplar Forest property. This is from 2019, where we had our annual field school. We found objects and some archaeological features that are promising, that could be related to Hannah's cabin or other cabins that were in this area at the same time that Jefferson had his retreat. So we're excited to be able to continue this ongoing search for more information, to be able to add more understanding to the story of the people living at Poplar Forest at that time. So the question of what happened to Hannah and other members of the enslaved community after Jefferson's death is something that we're still haven't fully answered. We're really not sure what happened to many individuals. We know that in many cases they were inherited by Jefferson's grandsons. Some cases we believe they were sold soon after Jefferson's death, or maybe several years after that, within the local community or possibly beyond. There's a chance that some individuals were taken to Florida when Francis Epps sold Poplar Forest in 1828, and completely removed from this place, this area. But additional research is needed and collaborative work with descendants to be able to learn more about these stories. So this is an ongoing effort. As you can see in this graphic, just kind of showing the difference and the break between the people living at Poplar Forest during Jefferson's ownership and then Francis Epps, his grandson's ownership, and when the plantation changed hands to William Cobbs, a local planter, and then later his son-in-law, Edward Hutter, who took over the management of Poplar Forest in the 1840s. So two completely different communities of people living here. And we've done work to explore this later antebellum community, the community that existed here in the decades leading up to emancipation. And there's lots of archaeological evidence for this. We've located several buildings and evidence where several more likely are located that we look forward to looking at more in the future. And this includes a standing structure as well as several wooden structures that no longer are standing. One of these is simply referred to as the Site A cabin. It includes evidence you can see here of a hearth and chimney, kind of toward the right of the image, as well as a square root cellar or subfloor pit located within this structure. Lots of artifacts, again, just a small sample of the artifacts we found that speak to daily life. For example, lots of buttons have been found. We are confident the seamstress was living here at the site, and lots of other insights into sort of what life was like at that time period right on the eve of emancipation. One of the really unique objects that's found, we find here at this particular cabin, is the Spanish half real. You can see the date is 1787, which obviously was by the 1850s something that had been well worn and used for a long time. It's a pierced coin. We see several of these at Poplar Forest. We know through WPA interviews in the early 20th century that this was a practice that continued in interviews with formerly enslaved people, as oftentimes pierced coins were seen as a source of good luck or spiritual protection or protection of health. In the case of this coin, also you can see the child's teeth marks. We know that coins were sometimes used as teethers, and so a very kind of very personal object, and that was used. And in the case of the circumstances of slavery, where money was so precious, the use of this object as an object of protection or as an object of comfort to a child was more precious than the money, what the money could provide in itself. Here you see two standing structures at Poplar Forest, originally referred to as the North Tenant House and the South Tenant House. The North Tenant House being an overseer's residence, the South Tenant House being initially a slave quarter, and then later providing residence for African Americans in the years after emancipation. This structure was built in 1857, now referred to as the 1857 slave dwelling, based largely on architectural research and documentary research we've done, along with archaeological research, to be able to provide details of the history of this building. This includes things that show us that it was three different households were using this structure. The one on the north side having access to the upper level and the lower level. The one on the south side having two separate entrances for two different households. The lower level on the north side is now being used for enslaved community tours, which are offered at Poplar Forest on a regular basis. Archaeological work has taken place over many years. This includes looking at a root cellar on the south side the building, looking at the foundations to be able to provide more information about how the structure was built and also when it was built, and also looking at the yard spaces around it to get more information about people's lives, starting when it was occupied by in the 1850s on the eve of emancipation. Here's a few of those objects that we've located, including pieces of a writing slate, candle snuffer, plates, all kinds of different things. These objects are used alongside the documentary record to be able to paint broader pictures of the lives of people at Poplar Forest. The second part of the talk, I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Karen McIlvoy. We'll talk about family trees and biographies, which draw on previous research and documents that are available, including Bernita Reed's work on the families, enslaved individuals and families that Jefferson held during his life, and many others. And this is something that's ongoing. It's a resource that's available now on site and for people who are interested in having access to it. And I hope will be a future source of continued collaborative work within the community as we continue this search for more information. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Karen.
Good morning. Gotta play musical chairs in the time of COVID, right? So, right. So as my colleague Eric already mentioned, when Jefferson inherited Poplar Forest in 1773, there were already 11 people living here, enslaved people living here and working here. But he very quickly began to move a lot of people to Poplar Forest, and in doing so, he ended up sort of gathering a bunch of people who ended up creating a community. Now, this community, by 1795, the core of the community had been established, and you can really look at it as being composed of 5 major families, each one headed by a husband and wife and their children and descendants. The first of these husband and wife couples are James and Kate Hubbard, whom Eric has already mentioned a little about them and their families. James was the head of the Bear Creek Quarter Farm. He was the person in charge of that quarter farm, and several of their children became very prominent members of the Poplar Forest community and the functions here at Poplar Forest. So including Hannah, one of their daughters, whom Eric has spoken of already. The second couple that sort of forms the core of the Poplar Forest enslaved community was Will and Abby. Will was one of the 2 blacksmiths here at Poplar Forest, and his wife Abby was one of the first individuals who was moved here in the 1770s when Jefferson inherited the property. She was moved here with her parents and her older brothers, and by the 1780s she was back with her husband Will and their first few children. The third couple that forms the core of the Poplar Forest enslaved community is Will and Bess. Will and Bess were here from the very beginning of the Jefferson era of ownership. They were, the 2 of them and their oldest children were actually 5 of those original 11 people who were living here when Jefferson inherited the property. Their oldest son, Hall, was the other blacksmith. He and Will worked together in the blacksmith shop to make tools and repair tools for the work here at Poplar Forest. Hall also eventually married Hannah Hubbard and was the father of her son Billy, whom Eric has already spoken to you very briefly about. The fourth couple here at Poplar Forest, that formed the core of the enslaved community here was Hercules and Betty. They were here by at least the early 1790s, and I'm going to talk to you about one of their children in just a few minutes. So I'll get to them. And then the fifth couple that formed the real core of the Poplar Forest enslaved community are Dick and Dinah. They are the youngest of these 5 husband and wife couples, and the last to arrive here, but they also have, a large family presence, and I'm also going to talk about one of their descendants in just a moment as well. So I've described the enslaved community as being composed of 5 distinct families, but as anyone who's ever tried to trace their own ancestry or create any sort of a family tree, you know that a family tree is based on whichever couple or person you choose as your focus. So while we have constructed these family trees based on these 5 husband and wife sort of matriarch and patriarch couples, you can in fact change all of these depending on who you wish to focus on. For example, Hannah, whom you see here highlighted in green, Hannah Hubbard, is the daughter of James and Kate, but her first husband was Solomon, so a son or a brother of Dinah, so she could be a member of the extended family of Dick and Dinah. Her second husband, Hull, was the son of Will and Bess, so she could also be a member of the Will and Bess family. It all depends on where you choose to focus the center of your family tree. This is just human communities. We're all connected in some way. It's just sometimes you have to pick and choose how you're going to draw the charts. So there were over 200 individuals enslaved here at Poplar Forest during Jefferson's ownership. And unfortunately, as much as I would love to, I don't think I have the time to tell you about all 200 plus. So I'm going to have to choose a few. So I think I'm going to start with one individual who is a child of Hercules and Betty, who was also named Hercules. Born in 1794, and most likely here at Poplar Forest, as we're not 100% certain, but we believe that Hercules and Betty were here by 1794. Unfortunately, Hercules the elder passed away in 1807 when young Hercules was only 13 years old, but as you can see, he did have an extensive family support system at the time. Unfortunately, young Hercules chose to leave Poplar Forest when he was 19 without permission, we'll put it that way. He was not successful in his attempts to escape. He was apprehended and confined in jail in Buckingham, Virginia, as you can see, about halfway between Poplar Forest and Monticello. He spent a few days in jail in Buckingham before he was sent up to Monticello to be confronted by Jefferson himself. Jefferson then sent Hercules back to Poplar Forest along with a letter to the overseer at the time, Jeremiah Goodman, saying that to paraphrase, that Hercules was a young man and that this was a youthful folly and that he believed his few days in jail would be punishment enough. But we can see from the letters that it may not have been just a youthful folly, as Jefferson believed it to be. A few years later, there was an epidemic, an actual epidemic, not a pandemic, that went through the enslaved community here at Poplar Forest. Over a period of almost 2 years, many people became very ill. Several people died. Hercules was one of the individuals who was described as being amongst the sickest or the most ill in early of 1819, but he recovered fairly quickly. We don't know precisely the circumstances, but we do have a letter from the summer of 1819 from the overseer at the time to Jefferson stating that the other members of the enslaved community were claiming or were blaming the illnesses and the deaths on young Hercules. Now, we obviously only have the white overseer's perspective of the issues, but and the events, but we do know that he had Hercules arrested. A second time he was arrested and taken before the magistrate, but the magistrate felt there was no evidence to support these claims and sent Hercules home. However, what we do get from this is some sort of evidence of an underlying tension within the enslaved community, between the enslaved community and Hercules, as well as between Hercules and the white overseer at the time. Finally, a few years later, this tension came to a head when Hercules was arrested for a third time. An incident happened where one of the other young enslaved men stabbed one of the overseers at Poplar Forest, and Hercules, his nephew Gavin, and that young man Billy, Hannah's son Billy, were arrested, and the three of them were all tried for plotting and conspiring the murder of this white overseer. They were acquitted of plotting and conspiring. Hercules and Gavin were both acquitted of all charges, but despite their acquittal, Jefferson decided that he would prefer to sell all three of these individuals rather than eat them. And so he sent all three of them down to New Orleans to be hired out to a local planter. We know that they all went to a Colonel Croghan and worked on his plantation about 30 miles outside of New Orleans. And unfortunately, within a year, Hercules had passed away, probably from dysentery or malaria, some sort of an illness that involved fever and stomach problems. But poor Hercules, he passed away at age 29. And this is one of those cases that's very, very rare to know, especially with the records of enslaved individuals, to know an enslaved individual's life from birth to death. We know where Hercules was almost any point in his life, whether he was born at Poplar Forest, living at Poplar Forest, and then died outside of New Orleans. This is very rare. It's far more common that we see small snapshots of an individual's life, although we don't know for certain what eventually happened to them, which is the case in the next person that I'm going to talk to you about. So I'm going to switch from a young man to a little girl. So I'm going to talk to you about this small subset of the family of Dick and Dinah. Specifically, I'm going to talk to you about Aggie and her daughter Sally. So Dick and Dinah had a daughter named Aggie in 1789, and in 1812 she had a daughter named Sally. Now, we do not know the exact circumstances of this of Sally's birth, but it is widely believed amongst historians that the father of Sally was Jeremiah Goodman, the head Poplar Forest overseer at that time. What we do know is, or what is very unusual to know about little Sally, is that we actually have a very small snapshot of her as a child. Records of children, especially enslaved children, are incredibly rare. And so it's wonderful to find this particular document that is an account of Jefferson's account with the local doctor. And right here you can see that Dr. Steptoe made 2 visits to treat Aggie's child, which is young Sally, in February of 1815. We don't know precisely what she was being treated for, but the prescription verb most likely refers to verbena, is that he gave her verbena, which at the time was used for pretty much everything. So it's a wild guess as to what she was ill with. But the fact that she was being seen by a doctor and not just treated at home or by her family members means she was either receiving special treatment or she was indeed very ill. Luckily, she did recover, and we know she recovered because later that year, Jeremiah Goodman left Jefferson's service and purchased young 3-year-old Sally for $150. The terms of the sale stated that Sally would remain in Jefferson's possession or physically remain at Poplar Forest with her mother until sometime in the future when Goodman decided to move her. So little Sally was not separated from her mother, which is a good thing just in general, but especially convenient in that 2 years later, Goodman sold her back. And it is stated in the sale back that she did in fact stay with her mother and thank goodness was not removed from her, was not separated from her. So we do know, we have one document from 1819 that shows that Sally is indeed still with her mother and the two of them are living at the Bear Creek Quarter Farm here at Poplar Forest. Now this is, like I said, one of those cases where we aren't entirely certain what happened to young Sally after this point, but there is a variety of documentary evidence to suggest that the Goodman family, or some member of the Goodman family, probably Jeremiah Goodman, once again purchased Sally after Jefferson's death. One of those pieces of evidence, just one of them, is this entry from the 1870 U.S. Federal Census in Albemarle, Virginia, the same place that the Goodman family farm was, for Sally Goodman, a woman of the correct age, and living, like I said, almost exactly the same place where the Goodman family patient was. So unfortunately, like I said, there's only so much time I have, and I can't tell you 200 different stories, but I would like to tell you one more, and I'd like to shift focus to the Hutter era. Because as my colleague has already stated, after Jefferson died, the enslaved community of Poplar Forest was scattered. It was dismantled. And unfortunately, we don't know what happened to most of those people. But what we do know is that a completely different community was established here at Poplar Forest. Now, we have significantly fewer documents from this era. It consists mostly of the family's income and expense records, a very short farm journal, and about 600 or so letters amongst the family members. But we just don't have as much documentary evidence to work with from this period. Also, it's been relatively recent that this era has become a focus of interest, so it just also hasn't yet benefited from the time involved in doing this kind of research. But that doesn't mean that we don't have anything yet. From these documents, we have been able to begin to piece together family trees from within this enslaved community. As you can see, compared to some of the ones that I was showing you from the Jefferson period, this is 3 separate families that I'm only able to thus far put together very small portions of, and hopefully in the future we will be able to grow these families or find out how these families are connected as well. Still working on that. But one of the documents that's been very helpful to us in this case is this entry in the Bedford County Deed Book from August 24th, 1841, in which William Cobbs sold to his brand new son-in-law, Edward Hutter, for the very high price of $1, 21 individuals. Now, what is helpful to us about this document is not only did they list the names of all 21 of those individuals, but they also told us their ages and exactly how they were related to each other, which was very helpful in creating this family tree. It is the largest portion of a family tree that we have been able to make for this community, for the community of this era of Poplar Forest thus far. Now, am only able to tell you small bits and pieces about any of these individuals, but I would like to focus on this person, a man named John Echols, because he's one of the few that we actually have multiple events in his life that we can talk about. So he was born around 1839 or so. He was about 2.5 years old when he was amongst that list of 21 individuals sold to Edward Hutter. When he was about 11 or 12, Hutter hired him out to the Virginia and Tennessee Railroad that was building tracks through Bedford County. At 11 or 12 years old, he was probably just an assistant, and he wasn't actually helping to lift or nail down rails, but it was still very hard physical labor. And there's suggestions from later on when he was 15 or 16 that labor took a toll on his health, because a few years later, when he was a teenager, he was very ill for a little over a year. And there was suggestions at the time that he lost the use of his limbs. Now, that is a broad description that we don't know precisely what that means, but he was clearly very sick or very injured. Thankfully, he did recover enough that as in his early 20s, he was able to travel away from Poplar Forest. He was chosen to accompany the Hutter family's eldest son or to escort him when he went to General Lee's camp to join the Confederate Army. But what this tells us is that, thank goodness, John was recovered enough and trusted enough, and he was able enough to travel on his own, and had just very, small amount of autonomy, very small amount of autonomy. So what I hope that you get from this portion of this presentation is that there's a wide variety of documents out there, and you might not be able to get every detail of every person's life, but with perseverance and a lot of patience and quite a healthy dose of luck, it's still possible if you to find out a lot about these individuals. Now, I'm going to turn this back over to my colleague to wrap up, and I hope that you enjoyed what you have seen today.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you so much for all who are taking part and participating today. Just want to close by saying that this is work in progress. We continue to learn more and look forward to involving others in this process as we continue over the years to come. And both related to the story here at Poplar Forest and also the larger story that leads up through emancipation to the decades that follow. So I'm excited to hear our guest speakers as they come up later today, with Renata Sanders and folks from the Getting Word Project this afternoon. And I thank you so much for your time and sharing your morning with us.
Great. Well, thank you, Eric and Karen. My name is Elise Payson. I'm the Programs and Events Coordinator here at Thomas Jefferson's Poplar Forest. And I thank all of you for attending today. And we have a great lineup of speakers, as you've seen with Eric and Karen. That was a great presentation on Poplar Forest and the enslaved community and how they go about conducting their research here to allow us to further tell the full story here at Poplar Forest. Well, we are going to take a quick, roughly 14-minute break. The next talk will start at 11:15, so make sure to jump back on for that. And we look forward to seeing you in a few minutes.